Belonging First, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Essentials course for the mining industry. This is Module 5, Belonging First as a Growth Strategy in a 5-part module course. I'm Andrea Carter, and this video is meant to support Women in Mining Canada's initiative to educate, elevate, and empower. In Module 4, 3 zones of cultural competence and equity, diversity, and inclusion awareness were outlined to further strategize the gaps that potentially exist within your organization. In this module, we'll share governance strategy, a research data for growth and governance metrics, as well as a gap assessment tool to help you think through short and long-term strategy. Fundamentally, strategy for equity, diversity, and inclusion governance, as compared to specific equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives in most organizations, are kept separate. Consider, for example, your ESG strategy versus your HR hiring policies and procedures. You can also think about the training your organization has participated in to understand some of the basic equity, diversity, and inclusion concepts and the talent and selection processes that you've adopted. For the most part, the governance, metrics, and data, as well as the EDI initiatives, have been kept separate. This is part of the problem for most organizations because they don't know what they don't know. And many of the equity, diversity, and inclusion specialists have been hired based on HR knowledge, skills, and abilities, and personality assessments rather than educational knowledge or accredited training within the EDI sector. Ultimately, the problem with this is that you may have initiatives that are being introduced to your organization, and you may also have governance checklists, but it may be that neither of them are working together enough to create an interdependent model that works for you. To create an effective EDI growth strategy, it's essential to unlock both two-dimensional diversity and inclusion, as well as a comprehensive means to measure both growth and performance. The reason being, and as many leaders are acutely aware, regardless of the sector, competitive strength and market growth depend on innovation. Greater productivity boosts earnings, but in today's fiercely competitive global economy, it's sequential innovation that drives and sustains growth. So, research shows that unlocking sequential innovation depends on the engine organizations create to enable a diverse workforce so that employees feel they belong and that the culture is managed by leaders who cherish difference, embrace disruption, and foster a speak up culture that feels comfortable in their ability to connect and contribute under psychologically safe conditions. Unlocking inclusive leadership behaviors that innovate the potential for an inherently diverse workforce, while complex, is essential for companies to increase their share of existing markets and open brand new ones. The following research data will help create context around the difference between organizations that foster a belonging first culture, whereby employees feel comfortable to speak up, to contribute, and to connect, with the identification and processes for new market opportunities. So, for example, research shows that diverse individuals are better attuned to the unmet needs of consumers or clients like themselves. So, their insights are crucial for identifying market worthy ideas. Specifically, when teams have more than one member who represent the gender, ethnicity, culture, generation, or sexual orientation of the team's target end user, the entire team is far more likely, in fact, as much as 158% more likely, to understand that target, increasing the likelihood of innovating effectively for that end user. This next slide shows the data for a percentage of respondents at companies with two-dimensional diversity, specifically two-dimensional diversity in leadership, versus the percentage of respondents at companies without two-dimensional diversity in leadership. So remember that two-dimensional diversity is having both superficial diversity and deep level diversity. This means that the previously shared modules 2 and 3, where we discussed leaders having both superficial and deep level diversity, is in fact incredibly important for employee comfort. If we look at employees who feel comfortable to contribute and connect their perspectives to innovations, the research shows that employees who report that their ideas win endorsements from decision makers are 65% in organizations with two-dimensional diversity leadership, compared to only 45% at companies without two-dimensional diversity leadership. Team members who report that they feel welcome and included in their team is 87% in organizations with two-dimensional diversity leadership versus only 51% in companies without two-dimensional diversity. With the third area, we're looking at the amount of employees that feel free to express their views and opinions. 87% versus 46%. And finally, employees that share their comfort levels regarding their ideas being heard and recognized are 74% with companies with two-dimensional diversity versus only 37% with companies without two-dimensional diversity. So many of you might be asking, well, what are the behaviors that lead to a belonging first growth strategy within the workplace? And this is where connecting governance with initiatives becomes part of the strategy so that metrics and data-driven decisions support growth and innovation. So first, I'm going to share some of the baseline data to report the following leadership behaviors that are compared between the percentage of respondents whose leader has at least three diversity traits versus the percentage of respondents whose leader has no deep diversity traits. So the first is looking at the team members who report that their leader ensures that everyone speaks up and gets heard. In companies whose leader has at least three diversity traits, 63% of employees feel that they are heard versus only 29%. So that means that a leadership behavior of ensuring that people are heard is extremely important to creating a belonging first culture. The second area is that the leader makes it safe to risk proposing new and original ideas. This happens 74% of the time when there is a leader that has three diversity traits versus companies whose leaders have no diversity traits. In the third bubble, we look at the amount of leaders that empower team members to make decisions. So in companies whose leader has at least three diversity traits, 82% employees report that this is happening versus only 40% in companies who have leaders with no deep level diversity traits. And the final area is looking at employees who reported that their leader takes advice and implements feedback, as well as provides actionable feedback. This happens 73% of the time in companies whose leaders have at least three diversity traits versus 30% of the time when companies have leaders that have no deep level diversity traits. So these are all leadership behaviors that need to be incorporated. With this research, what we're seeing here is that with leaders who have both superficial and deep level diversity, whose background and experience allow them to appreciate difference rooted in gender, age, culture, socioeconomic background, nationality, or sexual orientation, they behave more inclusively with a belonging focus than leaders who lack it. So the research shows that when leadership lacks innate or deep level diversity, or who fail to foster a speak up culture, fewer ideas with market potential make it to the market. Ideas for women, people of color, LGBTQ2S+, And Gen Ys are less likely to win the endorsement they need to go forward because 56% of leaders do not value the ideas they don't personally see a need for. So, a clear stopgap in innovation that formalizes only because there's a lack of context and value for differing perspectives. So, in short, the data strongly suggests that homogeneity stifles innovation and growth, reporting that 40% of teams feel groupthink is a problem on their team. 62% of employees report that leadership at their company do not perceive value in ideas they don't personally see a need for. And in the last 12 months, of those employees at publicly traded companies with two-dimensional diversity and leadership versus those at publicly traded companies without two-dimensional diversity and leadership, 46% of employees recorded that they captured a new market, as opposed to 27% of those who did not have two-dimensional diversity leaders. Research is clear. Diverse leaders unlock innovation with 70% more likelihood to see organizations or their organization capture a new market and 45% more likely to see their organization improve market share. So, how do we take this research and convert it into a comprehensive growth strategy that satisfies ESG requirements, EDI requirements, and HR talent management? Well, there's much more information that is being released with my second white paper at the end of Q4 of 2021, which consists of the benchmarking data and results from the 3,508 participants with the 13 TSX listed mining companies. For today, I want to leave you with actionable steps and actionable elements that you can start looking at and researching. So, one of the most critical steps is to perform a gap analysis that allows you to gather baseline data that's required for ESG, EDI, and HR. When we look at a gap analysis tool that provides you with the most effective data to start with this, looking at an EDI assessment that rates both certainty and importance in specific categories and subcategories that are then rated by both leaders and EDI or ESG committees are really, really helpful. So, the big thing that you're looking to do here is to start by gathering the baseline data that specifically helps you identify your highest priorities, as well as create your short and long term strategy. You then also want to be able to discover the elements of your business strategy and what can intersect with ESG, CSR, HR, and EDI. From there, you want to either include the committees that you've already created or the employee resource groups, or what you'll want to do is form those as well as the leaders who are going to own the governance elements. And then from there, record the metrics, identify the initiatives and learning, and track the interventions after they've been introduced to ensure that they're making a difference. So, the way that we have looked at doing this and that we've seen some really great success with is looking at setting up scales that are based on Likert scales, so a 5-point measurement scale on both certainty and importance. So, when we look at both certainty and importance, what happens is that you're going to be able to look at a gap analysis that then sorts out your short and long term areas in areas of importance, which are then converted into your long term strategy, as well as indicating what will be your short term focus. So, performing this type of EDI gap analysis, it will also help you identify where governance and EDI initiatives are most critical, as well as providing you with the key elements to track and measure as you develop your more comprehensive EDI strategy. So, when you're looking at certainty, you're looking at how certain are your leaders that you have the policies, procedures, strategy that's both trackable and measurable. And then from the level of importance, you're looking at how important are the many facets of ESG, CSR, EDI, and have they been organized by those priorities? So I'm going to show you in just a moment what this looks like. But this doing it this way and separating your questions into both certainty and importance allows you to not only track the training that is most relevant for your company, but also understand what it is you're tracking and measuring, as well as who is going to own it and continue to track and measure it. So let me just show you, this is what we've been looking at within some of our best practices that we've been implementing within other organizations. So we've essentially broken the measurements down into looking at HR strategy and operations, organizational culture, selection and recruitment, performance, growth, exit, and alumni. And these are just some of the main categories that we've looked at with our current organizations that we're working with. Within these areas, then, what we do is we break it down into looking at the HR strategy as well as the subcategory. So, if the subcategory for HR strategy and operations is actually strategy, we're then looking at a specific question that you may want to measure. So, for example, equity, diversity, and inclusion is embedded in our organizational talent strategy. With this question, we're then essentially measuring, I'm extremely certain that this is happening. I'm certain that this is happening. I'm somewhat certain that this is happening. I'm uncertain if this is happening, and I'm extremely uncertain if this is happening. Once the leaders or committee or hiring managers, depending on how you want to bring this into your organization, is assessed, then they are asked to base their rate, the level of importance that they feel is important for this to start happening. So, critically important, you're looking at within the next 6 months. Moderately important, you're looking at within the next 12 months. Important, 12 to 18 months. Somewhat important, 18 to 24. Not as important, 2 to 3 years. And in looking at these questions through this means, what you're doing is you're gathering data on how certain your leaders and committee are on the information that your organization has, as well as how important it actually is to them. Then, when you have the data analyzed, what you can understand is the areas your leaders and committees are certain about, as well as the level of importance to generate certainty in those areas. And the data then provides you both short and long term categories and subcategories of importance to help you formulate your strategies moving forward so that you make decisions based on data rather than assumptions of what you think should work. So, another example could be that if you looked at the category of organizational culture and the subcategory is leadership commitment, the question might be, EDI goals are included in the organization's strategic plan, or something like senior leadership knows how to consistently model inclusive leadership behaviors. Um, Another example might be that if you looked at your growth strategy and the subcategory is learning and development, the question might be, people managers are trained to be inclusive employees who are different from themselves. So, in order to put this together, the big thing that you want to start with is compiling your list of categories, which then create your list of subcategories, and then you'll look at what questions you want to ask within those um, within that survey that are applicable to your organization. Some categories that I have listed already are HR strategy, organizational culture, attraction, recruitment, selection, performance, growth, exit, alumni, as well as some of the environmental factors. We've been bringing those in a lot. Or some organizations are tracking technological disruption, climate change, or fractured geopolitics. But each organization has their own areas that are important to them, which is why there isn't really a one size fits all when it comes to this piece, and why it's important for those who are involved to sit down and actually create the categories, subcategories, as well as the questions that make the most sense. Now, once you have all of those pieces in place, it's you're really just identifying the critical questions within each of them, And then depending on your question your organization has compiled into each category, you may also consider involving your board of directors. So some of you might be thinking this is a lot of work. However, while it is on the front end, the cost savings that occurs from the gap analysis so you can make data-driven decisions is long-term. So everything from knowing what training to have and what leadership support development is needed to what selection and recruitment strategies are actually best for your organization to be able to attract diverse talent, all of those elements link back to your overall business strategy and do become imperative over the next 5 years as we see the demand for equity, diversity, and inclusion increase, as well as it reduces potential liabilities in the future. I highly encourage gap analysis at this stage to ensure that you begin your journey with the data required to make data-driven decisions. So, what's next? I can't wait to continue to support you further. As a reminder, the next phase of research will be released towards the end of Q4 of 2021. In the meantime, make sure that you've read The Unrealized Growth in Mining, Upgrading the Future to Include Human Capital and Belonging. Um, and if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to connect with me on, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or through my email. Take care for now.